G7 leaders are grappling with the fallout of the U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. President Biden is meeting with top allies right now in a closed press meeting. They're expected to urge the president to extend the August 31st deadline to complete the evacuation. Thousands of Americans and Afghans are still desperately waiting to be rescued at Kabul's airport, but the Taliban has warned the U.S. against pushing back the withdrawal, indicating there would be consequences. For more on this, let's bring in Olivier Knox. He's the author of the Washington Post, the daily 202 newsletter. Olivier, so what kind of implications does the situation in Afghanistan have on the Biden administration, just broadly speaking?
Well, broadly speaking, this is obviously his most serious foreign policy, national security crisis. There are thousands, we don't know exactly how many, thousands of Americans still on the ground in Afghanistan. The administration is, of course, trying to get them, as well as Afghans who helped the 20-year war effort, out and to safety away from the Taliban. It's enormously important. It is extremely complicated. It's not just a massive military logistical operation. There are also very sensitive diplomatic and national security considerations. The president has seen some of his poll numbers droop over the past couple of months, not just because of Afghanistan. In fact, I would suggest that his bigger problem is that his approval ratings on the pandemic and on the economy have slipped, and that's a bigger problem for the president. But there's no doubt that this is testing the administration in ways that had not necessarily been anticipated. You know, you alluded to the G7 virtual meeting. This is going to be very, very important because we are all watching that August 31st deadline, that self-imposed deadline, the one that the Taliban are now warning of red lines if we stay beyond that. My colleague John Hudson has a nice piece today about the CIA director, Bill Burns, meeting in secret with Mr. Baradar, one of the Taliban leaders. One can only assume that one of the chief topics was whether the United States can stay past this August 31st deadline.
You know, as I've been watching this unfold, I've been wondering whether or not one of the things the president is considering is to get this withdrawal, if you will, out of the way early in his presidency, in the hopes that a longer view, a view from a more distant point in time, things will look differently. On Sunday, President Biden told reporters that history will in fact mark his Afghanistan withdrawal as, quote, logical, rational, and the right decision to make. In your latest analysis in the Washington Post, you say there are two factors that will largely determine how history will judge this president. What are those factors?
That's right. I think that the two dominant factors here, one is, can the evacuation proceed with minimal loss of life, in particular, no American loss of life? Thus far, that's been the case. That's the obvious immediate concern. Over the longer term, though, I think one of the questions is we know from public opinion polling that withdrawing from Afghanistan is broadly popular. In fact, we know from the November election, in which both Donald Trump and Joe Biden had promised to withdraw from Afghanistan, we know that the voters think that this is the right course of action. What we don't know is how many Americans wanted a withdrawal because they thought the Afghan government and the Afghan military would hold their ground. In other words, we don't necessarily know how many of these folks supported a withdrawal premised on the idea that we would not be seeing the kinds of images that we are seeing now coming out of Afghanistan.
So, Olivier, two questions then or a follow-up question based on your analysis there. What is the president prepared to do if there is loss of life, an American who is killed during this evacuation attempt? And secondly, what of the Taliban? You know, we had the report earlier that our correspondent Roxana Saberi, who's interviewed a Taliban spokesperson, says that there will be consequences if the president tries to extend that deadline. What is the administration thinking if they need to extend that deadline, and if those consequences bear fruit on the side of the Taliban?
Well, we should stipulate that the administration says it thinks, the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan most recently yesterday said that they think they have the wherewithal to get all Americans out before the deadline. What we've seen in the public messaging from the president on down is regularly warning the Taliban that any interference with the operation, any interference with the efforts to get Americans out of Afghanistan will be met with some kind of show of force. I don't want to speculate about what the Pentagon has planned here, but that's been a regular feature of their messaging. August 31st deadline. This is a real problem, and as I said, I'm sure that the CIA director Bill Burns broached this topic. We know that the French, the Germans, and the British are pushing President Biden to extend the deadline, or at least to envision the probability that it will take longer than the next week or so to get everybody out. So we're going to be watching really carefully to see what comes out of this Group of 7 meeting. This is some of America's most important allies, the rich democracies around the world, and also a lot of NATO members that have had a presence on the ground in Afghanistan. We're going to be watching to see what comes out of this virtual meeting when it comes to that deadline.
Meanwhile, I'm sure the president would like to have some positive domestic news, if anything, to serve as a bit of a distraction. Democratic lawmakers in the House were really working overnight to ease some intra-party divisions on infrastructure. Several moderate Democrats say that they will block President Biden's multi-trillion-dollar budget plan unless the House passes the Senate-passed bipartisan infrastructure bill first. As the Biden administration, faces some backlash, some criticism over Afghanistan, how important is the successful passage of these spending packages?
We are watching something fairly remarkable. We are watching a small group of moderate Democrats essentially threaten to torpedo the bulk of President Biden's domestic agenda. Now, we always knew that the razor-thin Democratic majorities in the Senate and the House of Representatives would give leverage, well, really to anyone who cared to use that leverage. And that's what we're seeing now in the House. But it is fairly remarkable. And we, those of us who cover this stuff, had always sort of wondered about the moderates in the Senate. It turns out the moderates in the House are potentially a bigger hurdle. So we have now a delay on some of these votes as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tries to wrangle them and convince them that the right order of battle is to push ahead with this very large Democratic proposal on infrastructure and then to move to the bipartisan proposal. They want to do the bipartisan thing first. The reason that they'd sequenced this the way they did is they were worried about keeping the moderates on board. It turns out that's a very real worry. They just didn't think it would pop up this late in the process.
Yeah, Olivier, it's interesting to me, too. Nancy Pelosi, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who's always seen reportedly to have a pulse on what's going on in her caucus, to be, I don't want to use the term blindsided, and you'll know better than I, but this group of moderate Democrats, led by Josh Gottheimer, who represents New Jersey's 5th District, I think most Americans hadn't heard of Josh Gottheimer, Representative Gottheimer, up until this week, and he's added a member to those moderates who are seeking concessions from Speaker Pelosi. Explain that to me, how she may have missed that, and what are you hearing about the negotiations she's having with these moderates?
Yeah, again, I don't know that blindsided is quite the right word. We always knew that there was some tension there. I think people were watching the left flank of the party maybe a little bit more closely than the moderates, at least in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, a lot of the focus has been on Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kirsten Sinema of Arizona. So we focused on them. At the House level, I guess what surprises me a little bit is that it's coming up this late in the process. Now, you might say this is, of course, when they have maximum leverage, right? But it does. I still find it remarkable that we have folks who are saying that they are prepared to tank the bulk of Joe Biden's domestic agenda unless they get what they want. Now, we're also seeing movement on the Senate side where Sinema and Manchin have suggested they're not going to support the $3.5 trillion proposal, the sort of Democrats-only proposal. So there are headaches all around if you're a Democratic leader in the United States Congress today.
Yeah, a traffic jam everywhere you look. We didn't even get a chance to talk about police reform, which seems to be going nowhere. Of course, voting rights reform also seems to be going nowhere. Olivier, we are running out of time, so I have to say thank you.
Thank you very much.